I felt him before I saw him. His breath stirred the dust. His heartbeat disturbed my silence. For the first time in a century, the house exhaled, and so did I. The front door creaked open, protesting the intrusion. Footsteps echoed through the foyer, hesitant yet determined. I lingered in the shadows, watching as he stepped inside. He was younger than I expected, perhaps in his early 30s. Dark hair tousled by the sea breeze, eyes that held the weight of sorrow. He moved with the caution of someone carrying invisible burdens. He paused in the center of the room, taking in the faded wallpaper, the cracked molding, the chandelier that hung like a forgotten memory. A faint smile touched his lips. "This place has stories," he murmured. "Indeed, it does." He set down a battered suitcase, its leather worn and scuffed. As he explored, his fingers brushed against the banister, the fireplace mantel, the windowsill, each touch awakening memories long dormant. In the study he lingered. Dust motes danced in the sunlight filtering through the stained glass window. He ran his hand along the bookshelf, pausing at a volume of poetry. "Theron Vale," he read aloud, tracing the embossed letters. "I've heard of you. My heart, if it could still beat, would have quickened." He opened the book, flipping through pages yellowed with age. His gaze softened as he read, lips moving silently. "Your words, they resonate," he whispered. I moved closer, drawn by the sincerity in his voice. He shivered, glancing around. "Must be a draft," he said, rubbing his arms. I wanted to speak, to tell him he wasn't alone. But the words caught in the chasm between life and death. Over the next few days, he settled in. The house, once silent, now echoed with the sounds of life, footsteps, the clatter of dishes, the scratch of a pen on paper. He wrote late into the night, candlelight casting flickering shadows on the walls. I watched from the periphery, captivated by his presence. He spoke to himself as he wrote, sharing fragments of his thoughts, his past, his pain. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, he sat by the fireplace, a blanket draped over his shoulders. He stared into the flames, eyes distant. "I came here to escape," he said softly. "To find peace." I wished I could offer comfort, to let him know he wasn't alone in his solitude. As days turned into weeks, he began to sense me. A glance over his shoulder, a pause in his writing, a furrowed brow. He'd whisper into the empty room. "Is someone there?" "Yes, Elian. I am here." One night, he left a note on the desk. "If you're real, if you're here, please say something." I reached out, fingers brushing the pen. It trembled, then fell to the floor. He stared, eyes wide, breath hitching. A smile broke across his face. "You're real," he breathed. "Yes, Elian. I'm real." And so, our story began. He talks to himself while he writes. Low murmurs, half-formed sentences that unravel like thread between his fingers. He paces when the words won't come, runs his hand through his hair until it sticks up in wild tufts, then sighs like the wind trying to remember how to sing. He sleeps with the lights on. Always. A small brass lamp glows beside the bed, spilling golden light across his face. I've tried to understand why. Perhaps he's afraid of the dark, or maybe the silence reminds him too much of someone he's lost. He shifts in his sleep, muttering names I don't recognize. I listen closely. None of them are mine. Elian Morrow, the living man with the broken eyes. His gaze never truly lands on anything. It slips past the world, as if he's constantly looking for someone who's not there. I've watched him trace the rim of his teacup absent-mindedly, eyes glazed over, his mind clearly elsewhere. Maybe back in the arms of a lover, or standing beside a grave. I shouldn't care. I'm a ghost, tethered to the bones of this house. But when he arrived, he brought something in with him. Not just life, but pain. Familiar pain. And I recognized it the way a storm knows another storm. He started to speak more freely now. Not to me, never directly, but to the space I occupy. He'll stand in the study, glancing at the portraits, the mirror, the long-dead fireplace, and say things like, "You'd laugh at what I'm writing," or "This line sounds like someone else's voice." At first, I didn't answer. Couldn't. But I've begun moving things, small things. His pen, his teacup, A fallen page lifted back onto his desk by a breeze that has no source. He notices. He doesn't flee. He watches, waits. Then came the night. The one that changed everything. He sat cross-legged on the old velvet settee, manuscript pages scattered around him like snowdrifts. Rain tapped gently at the windows. He tilted his head, as if listening for a note only he could hear. "I feel like someone's here," he whispered. My name was on the tip of my tongue. It burned to be spoken. Instead, I creaked a floorboard beneath his feet. He didn't scream. Didn't run. He looked around, eyes wide, not with fear, but with hope. "If you are," he said, "thank you for staying. This house feels less empty now." I could have wept if I still remembered how. He's lonely. I know that kind of solitude, the kind that gnaws at the edges of sanity and makes the air feel too thick to breathe. It's strange, isn't it? How two souls, one living, one not, can find echoes in each other's silence. He talks to himself while he writes. But now, sometimes I whisper back. And when he sleeps, I sit beside the bed, watching the flicker of lamplight on his cheekbones, the gentle rise and fall of his chest, and I wonder what it might feel like to be seen. Mirrors are strange things, and one day he saw me through the mirror. They do not just reflect, they remember. This one had hung in the front parlor since 1871. Its silver had tarnished at the corners, the frame warped slightly by sea air and time. But it still knew me. It had once shown me brushing my collar, adjusting my tie, fixing a smile before guests arrived. It had known me alive. It knows me still. He stood in front of it that morning, shirt half-buttoned, mug of black coffee steaming between his hands. I watched him through the glass, standing just behind him, where I always do, hidden between glances, tucked into the folds of his distracted thoughts. He didn't usually notice. Not until today. I don't know what changed. Perhaps the veil was thin. Perhaps I was tired of hiding. He looked up, and for the briefest second, his eyes met mine in the mirror. It wasn't a trick of the light or a flicker in the glass. He saw me, a ghost in a waistcoat, a face out of time. The silence between us collapsed. My chest, though long hollow, ached with the memory of breath. He spun around. I was already gone. "Who are you?" he asked aloud, voice low, cautious. I should have stayed silent. It would have been safer. For both of us. But something inside me, some echo of who I used to be, answered. "My name is Theron." The room didn't shake. The sky didn't fall. But the house felt different, as though it were holding its breath. He froze. I thought he hadn't heard me. But then he whispered it back. "Theron." He said it like a question. Like a poem he didn't yet understand. "You're real," he said, not to me, but to himself. "Yes," I said. I don't know what he expected next. A chill wind? Flickering lights? The typical theater of hauntings. But I gave him none of that. I stood quietly in the doorway, my hands folded, like I used to stand when guests arrived late and unannounced. He stared toward the empty space I occupied. "Why are you here?" "I never left," I said. The words lingered in the room like perfume from a vanished lover. He walked forward slowly, almost reverently, and stopped where I once stood as a man, near the fireplace. "Are you trapped?" "Yes." "And now me?" "No," I said softly. "But you stayed anyway." That night, he didn't write. He sat by the mirror instead, candlelight dancing along its edge. He touched the glass gently, as if he could trace my shape there. And I stood beside him, closer than I had dared before, afraid that any louder thought would frighten him away. But he only whispered, "Theron." And this time it felt like a beginning. Days later, he decided to check the attic. The attic door groaned when he opened it. No one had climbed those stairs in decades. Not since the roof began to weep and the floor forgot its own strength. Dust hung in the air like frozen breath. Cobwebs swayed gently, stirred by his presence. Or perhaps by mine. He should not have found it. That small leather journal, its spine cracked, the last few pages soaked in something long dried but never erased. My name was on the final page, Theron Vale, written with a trembling hand, the ink smudged by blood and rain. That was the last night of my life. The night my body failed and the world simply moved on. He read the words slowly. His lips moved, forming pieces of my thoughts, my memories, my grief. And he didn't flinch. He didn't close the book or toss it aside as madness. No, Elian held it like it mattered. When he came back down, he looked pale but calm, eyes dark and brimming with the weight of questions no one had asked me in over a century. "Did you write it?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the old velvet armchair in the parlor. "Yes," I said. His gaze flicked to the corner where I hovered, barely visible, half reflected in the glass of the window. "Why were you bleeding?" I hesitated. No one had ever wanted to know. Not really. But he asked, not with fear, but with gentleness. As if knowing would let him carry a fraction of it for me. "Someone I loved left," I said carefully. "And I forgot how to want to stay." He looked down, fingers tracing the rim of his teacup. "I know that feeling." Grief sat between us, old and patient. But something else bloomed there too. Recognition. Maybe even kinship. Later that night, he lit candles in the dining room and brought out a chipped porcelain teapot. He made tea, the scent of bergamot and something sweet curling through the house like a hymn. And then he placed 2 cups on the table, one in front of himself, and one where I might sit if the world were kinder. He didn't say anything about it, just poured the tea with quiet dignity, as though my hands might still wrap around the warmth. As though my presence was not just possible, but welcome. He looked up and smiled. "Just in case," he said softly. That simple kindness, the invitation of it, unstitched something in me I hadn't known was still sewn shut. I hadn't known what aching joy felt like. Not until then. And as he drank his tea and the cup beside him cooled untouched, I stood silently across from him, sadder and fuller and more seen than I had ever felt in life. One day, his hand passed through mine. It happened on a Tuesday, when the fog rolled in heavier than usual, curling against the windows like it wanted inside. The fire in the hearth sputtered low, shadows stretching long across the parlor floor. He had been writing, elbows on the desk, brows furrowed, glasses slipping down the bridge of his nose. His pen stalled. His thoughts, I could tell, were elsewhere. With me. He turned his head slowly, like he didn't want to startle whatever presence lingered in the corner of his eye. "Are you here?" he asked, almost shyly. I was. "I feel you when I wake up," he continued. "Not just the cold, it's something warmer. Like something remembering me." I drifted closer, hesitant. I'd never dared to bridge the gap so boldly. But he didn't move away. He held out his hand. Foolish, maybe. Impossible, definitely. But I reached for it. His fingers passed through mine. Of course they did. But something sparked. Not a touch. Not exactly. A tingle like static before a storm. A hum deep in the marrow of the room. A pulling in my chest, like every part of me that remembered what it meant to feel was suddenly awake again. He inhaled sharply, not in fear, but in wonder. "I felt that," he whispered. "So did I said, though I doubted he could hear it. But his gaze locked where mine would be, as though some unspoken part of him had. Then he said it. "I don't care if you're dead. I just don't want to be alone again." I'd spent over 100 years hearing silence. Hearing prayers. Screams. Laughter from strangers who lived briefly in these rooms before leaving. But nothing, not in life, not in death, had ever shattered me like that. He said my name next. Theron. And it was not a question. Not an invocation. It was a welcome. As if he was calling me back to something I had no right to want. Something like life. My essence trembled. My memories quaked. I wanted to weep, but the dead do not cry. I wanted to scream, but the house had heard too many screams already. So instead, I leaned forward, and I pressed a kiss, soft and visible, against the air beside his cheek. He shivered violently. A gasp escaped him, and his eyes fluttered closed, mouth parting slightly in some combination of awe and ache. "I knew it," he breathed. "You're not just in my head." No, I wasn't. I had lived in this house. I had died in this house. And now perhaps I could love again in this house. A week later, there was a lightning strike. It began with a storm unlike any I had ever seen, even in life. The sky tore itself open. Lightning carved through the clouds like veins of fire, and thunder rattled the bones of the house I had haunted for more than a century. But that night something shifted. I don't know if it was the storm, or Elian's unwavering belief in me, or the weight of love stretching between worlds that simply refused to break. But something ancient, something sacred shattered. A boundary, a curse, a rule never written. Whatever it was, it gave. And for the first time since 1912, I felt alive. Not metaphorically. Not in some poetic breath of memory. Alive. My feet touched floorboards that groaned under my weight. My reflection blinked back at me from the mirror. I was no longer a ripple in the air or a chill on the neck. I was real. Flesh. Form. Warmth. Elian was standing at the bottom of the stairs, mouth open, eyes wide. The candle he held trembled in his grasp, its flame dancing wildly. He didn't speak. Neither did I. I simply stepped toward him. He dropped the candle, let it roll away into the dark. His hands reached for me, this time touching. Skin on skin. Solid. Certain. We danced then. To no music. To the rhythm of rain and lightning, the creaking sighs of the house, and our own astonished breathing. His head rested against my shoulder. My arms held him like I'd never get another chance. Because I wouldn't. We kissed under flickering candlelight, slow, reverent, disbelieving. We didn't ask how long the miracle would last. But the morning told us. The light came through the windows like knives. The warmth in my chest began to dim. I looked down at my hands and saw them blurring at the edges, fading like smoke. The house was reclaiming me. Elian. I choked out, the word fraying at the edges. He clutched me tighter. No. Don't go. Please. But love, even ghostly love, requires sacrifice. I had tasted the impossible, and I knew it wasn't mine to keep. So I made the only choice I could. I chose reincarnation. A chance to return to the world, not as a memory or a spirit or a whisper in the walls, but as someone new. It meant forgetting. It meant starting over. But I didn't forget everything. Not entirely. 2 years later, in a quiet little bookstore by the sea, a stranger with soft eyes and calloused fingers walked in and smiled at the man behind the counter. "Hi," he said. "I'm Theo." And Elian dropped the pen in his hand, stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. Then tears filled his eyes. And he whispered, "I found you again.